4. This is the 4th time I've tried to do this. 4th time. First 3 times, scripted things out, sitting there, editing the video. All 3 times, over an hour long. Not happy with any of it. Not happy with any of it, and I wasn't completely thrilled about how I was stopping myself from going off on tangents. And I'm beginning to think that maybe the best way for me to do this is to just go with it one take and just fucking go for it. And just don't overthink anything and don't question it and just keep on pushing. So we're just going to do it. This is the first installation of a metaphysical analysis of lyrics, Bright Eyes method acting. And shit, we're just going to jump right in, and I'm going to keep this to between 15 and 20 minutes. I swear to God this time. And I won't have to edit shit. Alright. Right off the bat, there's no beginning to this story. And I got to the point where I started to see that story as this metaphorical story. The story for source energy. The story for us as our higher selves. Us as God. And that story can have no beginning, because that story has always existed. Because us in our highest sense is everything. We are that source energy. And there is no beginning to it because it has always existed. And for us to draw these finite, arbitrary lines and create our identities and create the story of our lower selves' lives is for us to try to be able to make sense of ourselves. Because obviously, yes, if we are one and we are infinite, how do we make sense of any of that? There's no way we can do that. We have to be able to draw a line. We have to be able to give ourselves form so that we can exist in, so that we can incarnate, and that we have these individual finite lives for us to exist in. And this is interesting too, because I was having such a hard time talking about a lot of this stuff and a lot of this topic because there is no beginning to this story. So if there is no beginning, where do you start? You would think it would be easy because then you just kind of jump right in wherever, but you have to kind of build some kind of context for what we're talking here. And it's hard to try to create something and use that as context for something else, because so much of our understanding about whatever we just created is contextual with what it was created in. And this just speaks to us being this groundless, formless object that has no middle, beginning, or end, because we are just all of it. Alright, keep rolling. And a language learned and forgotten in turn is studied once again. And again, coming back to this process of our finite lives that we incarnate into, and then we start learning us. We start learning that language. And then that language learned and forgotten in turn, that is then studied again, is us. It is all of us. Regardless of whatever we're looking at, we are studying ourselves. We are both the literal and figurative language that we are learning. And to be able to kind of give ourselves these forms to kind of take this ride, this like weird life, this weird ride that life is, and to just kind of make the mistakes and forget the lessons that we learn and try to come back around to those lessons and keep remembering them. And as we keep living those lessons, it's almost like they're over there. And then we try to keep those lessons with us for our entire lives. And then we try to ultimately remember what we are. We try to come to the conclusion that, oh, all this around me is me. This entire thing I've been looking at, these languages I've been learning, it is myself. And I will learn and forget this as many times as I have to until I don't have to do it again. Until I can finally go back to that source energy, to that singularity. It's almost like life is this ride that we put ourselves through as our higher selves, knowing that we're gonna love it so much, knowing that this process of self-discovery and learning about ourselves is so gratifying, we're just going to want to do it over and over again. And then when we're done, we go back to that source energy, we're going to get bored again. We're going to be sitting in our infinite perfection, just bored without any reference. I have no idea what that would look like. We're just going to keep going through it. We're going to learn and forget ourselves over and over again. And we're going to keep moving. We're going to keep moving. It's a shocking bit of footage viewed from a shitty TV screen. And then we become that footage. And then ultimately, yes, the TV screen and the footage are the same thing. That is to say that reality is the medium for itself. We are the medium for ourselves. And then we learn that footage, and then it's almost like the footage is however reality or our events in our lives are collapsing into being at every second or every minute or however it looks. And then that becomes the footage. And us being the shitty TV screen is because we are so limited. It's because our senses are so limited, because we're trying to tune into ourselves. And because we are infinite and there's no way to completely get all of ourselves at once, because we are everything, we need to have this finite sense, like a smell or sight, and then this like social skills or whatever we're doing. Jumping ahead a bit, and then trying to squint at that static to make out meaning, and stretching that antenna is us trying to tune into ourselves. Us stretching the antenna is us trying to tune in to that feedback loop that we are. It's almost like we're sending it out and it's coming back around, sending it out all the time, and it's happening so instantaneous. It's almost like we feel like we're one thing. But I think more in line of what we are, obviously, yes, one thing, but we are layers. We're layered on top of ourselves, and we hear ourselves when we speak so quickly, and that feedback loop is so tight that it just feels like it's one thing. And then once that feedback loop starts to like slow down a little bit, and there's this gap in between what we're thinking or feeling or saying, then we're like, what is that? What's going on? And I think to realize ourselves as that feedback loop, which begins with self-awareness and consciousness, is the first step that it takes to be able to change the input in that feedback loop. And then once that happens, your life gets directed. You kind of stop reacting, and you start to become the observer. And then once you become the observer and you're not immediately just, your ego's not invested into this thing so much, then you can just kind of be, and just be present. And kind of coming back to the idea that we created these bodies and forms for ourselves. It's almost like, it's like that Shakespeare quote where it's the world is a stage and everyone's a player. And this really speaks to the idea of us as God making ourselves forget, being so infinitely powerful, we can make ourselves forget, and then we kind of act. We're kind of just acting. And after a while, we start to break character when we realize that we're acting to begin with. And then we're kind of in the middle of some things, and we're like, what are we doing? That's weird. There's this thing that happens with words, with just forms in general, with like a word or a phrase. When you say it long enough, it starts to sound like noise. And then you hear the word or phrase for the arbitrary syllables that it is. And the same thing happens if you're looking at a word too long enough. If you're looking at a word too long and you're like, I don't like how this looks. Like, it doesn't look right. I feel like I spelt it right, but it doesn't look right. And I found the same thing happens with our own egos and our own identities, where when we think about what we are for long enough, we realize that we are also, our identities are just this arbitrary set of syllables that we are giving meaning to. We create ourselves in every sense and on every level. So in addition to us creating these forms for us to live in as our higher self, in these forms, we are then drawing further lines so that we can make sense and get some kind of orientation. And then we create the idea of left and right. Or we create these dualities of right and wrong so we can try to make sense and get some kind of direction here. Because again, coming back to, if it's one thing, there's no way to make sense of anything. There's no background. There's no contrast for us to be looking at ourselves in. And then we want some reception, a higher message. Just tell us what to fear. So I kind of realized, for me, it's almost easier if we're being told what to be afraid of, because then we can define against that what our higher message should be. It's like, if you at least give me one of these things, I can kind of figure out the rest. But I feel like the problem with life and getting to there being so many possibilities feels overwhelming. And then we look at all the different directions that we can shoot off on, and we're like, I just don't know what to do, and it feels overwhelming to the point where you just stop and just kind of collapse into just one thing. Or you feel overwhelmed and you just kind of stop and breathe. And stop and breathe. Alright, hot shit. Keep moving, Matthew. Keep moving. And then, alright, yeah. All I know is that I feel better when I sing. It's almost this realization that, oh my God, there's just too many things. There's just too many things. So what do? Stop thinking about it. Just be present. There's so many things. If you get caught up on how many individual things there are and you never set a goal and focus on whatever that is, you're going to be stuck in the fairy tale land of your mind. And that was my issue for a lot of my life, is that I felt stuck up here. I couldn't get any traction with my ideas, with what I wanted, because I wanted it to be so so perfect. But reality is not perfect. It's almost like reality is just good enough. It's almost like we threw everything up against the wall, and however it was supposed to fall is how it fell. And then coming back to me deciding to do this video like this. I do it this way because whatever happens is going to happen. It's not going to be perfect. And I have found that I've been able to be a very present, in the moment person. If I give myself a script and I give myself something direct to follow, and I feel like it's not that, first of all, I got too much stuff that I need to be able to focus on to try to get down into any kind of concise content. And then in addition to that, I'm going to start getting frustrated from this, instead of just being in that present moment and rolling with it and rolling with whatever happens. And then at that point, you're kind of more in line with how our higher selves create, with how God or source energy is creating, because it has no ulterior motive. It doesn't have an ego to its creating. It just does because it wants to do. So it feels better when it sings, so it just does it. Of course there's all this stuff. Just be. And don't overthink it. Don't, it's funny to tell somebody to not overthink, because then that kind of becomes overthinking, and a lot of this work is very paradoxical, and it's hot shit. All right, Michael, please keep the takes rolling. Boys, keep strumming those guitars. We need a record. We need a record of our failures, and yes, coming back to me doing it this way. And then, so the record of my failures, all the mistakes that I have made trying to shoot these videos up until this point, becomes content for this one. And then the record of our failures becomes almost like the negative outline or shape that lets us see the context of what that thing is. It's almost like the guy that chiseled out Michelangelo from the marble. He said Michael was always in there. You just had to remove the parts of it that weren't it. You had to remove that negative space. And then that kind of obviously comes back to like learning skills and having to make mistakes. And it's almost like this program runs through this loop over and over again, and each time it gets a little bit better. It takes a little bit more of the parts that are or aren't it, until eventually you get to the shape. And that's what I feel like reality and life are trying to calibrate us for something greater than ourselves. Something greater than our lower self, which I feel like ultimately is our higher self. We need a record of our failures. We must document our love. So, across shooting these videos, I came to this conclusion that it's almost like love. Love is almost a form of failure. Perhaps the willingness to fail is your willingness to love at all. Because when you can lay down and detach and surrender and stop holding on to things so much, you're willing to love yourself and forgive yourself, and you're willing to forgive and love other people. And then unconditional love starts to make sense, and you start to see the shape of it. Because ultimately, once you come to the conclusion that you are everybody, if you can forgive yourself, why shouldn't you be able to forgive other people, and vice versa? If you know they're you, ultimately, and in addition to that, coming back to like social things, like eye contact. If you're afraid to make eye contact with somebody, Don't be afraid. They're you. If you can look in the mirror, why shouldn't you be able to look at somebody else? And sometimes you can't look yourself in the mirror. And if you know you have that wall, then you're kind of getting the frame of where you stand in this whole process of self-awareness. Document. I sat too long in my silence, grown too old in my pain. Coming back to, yes, me getting stuck in the airy land of my head, in that silence of my thoughts without ever, speaking or creating anything. And then coming back to us, thinking about us as our higher selves in that infinite singular perfection. Just bored. You've sat too long in that perfection. You want to speak, you want to create, you want to incarnate, be. And yes, to shed the skin, be born again. It starts with an ending. You want to have skin to shed in the first place. You want to have a soul to be born again and be reincarnated in the first place as that infinite singularity. I keep moving. So thank you, friend. Again, thank you, friends, for the time we've shared. My love stays with you like sunlight and air. Almost again, this other realization that it's kind of time to go. You can only take this ride of forms so long before these forms will start to fail you. And I've seen this theme in this work of form coming to formlessness, only to come back around and realize you never needed whatever form it was to begin with. But you had to take it to get to there. And then you come to the realization, oh my God, I never had to do any of that. And then life is almost the ultimate version of that. You do life until you realize you never needed it in the first place. And then another example, me going through Catholicism, one form, to get to atheism, another form, just to come back around and discover that both were an expression of the same energy. And then again, you saw that duality. And then once you see it's there, instead of going left and right and back and forth, you can step outside of it. You can go meta and start to look at yourself in the same way. And then you become the observer. You're not... Truly wish I can keep hanging around here. And a metaphor of me wanting to be able to say all these things in these videos, because I have a lot to say, and I'm going to keep doing more songs and keep getting them out that way. But the idea that it's like, if I could stay down here and keep adding shit to the video, but if I never draw the line and cut it off, the video's never going to be done. There's not ever going to be any content. And if you always want it to be perfect, you're never going to stop and do it and put it out there, because you're so concerned about having it be perfect instead of just having it be. And then you're not being, you're, again, stuck up there. And it's not a movie, no private screening. And so coming back to us kind of being actors, and there's some actors that kind of start to realize that they are God acting as a human being to then come here and become an actor or an actress. I think Jim Carrey's a great example of that, and I've always really related to him, and now I'm kind of starting to understand why. But you get to this point where you're like, oh, this is not a movie. I'm not an actor. I'm not what I thought I was. And you see, oh, this is not a movie. And then no private screening. It's not personal. None of this is personal. This process you're going through, and then again, once you realize that it's not personal, you can love. You can stop fighting, because you're like, oh. And another reason, it's like there's nobody outside of you to make it personal. You're the only thing that exists. We are the only thing that exists. There is nobody outside of us to make it personal for us. And then in addition to that, you can stop putting that energy out too, because you know that it's not personal. So when you forgive and you stop that vicious cycle of just ego, because energy is going to propagate itself, whether it's negative or positive. And then come back to the name of the song, this method acting. Method acting, the idea that you're almost kind of trying to forget who you are or drop whatever you are for a little bit, just so you can embody this role, so you can act. We have a problem with no solution but to love and to be loved. My favorite line in the entire album, because again, really speaks to life and reality being this like weird paradoxical problem, because it's not really a problem, it just is what it is. Once you realize it is what it is, and you realize the ego is the problem, and by loving it, you can evaporate it, and everybody starts to get to that frequency, then we start to go up in frequency, as is happening in these times now. Things are getting fun. Things are getting fun as hell. So I've made peace with the falling leaves. And once you kind of come to terms with, once the ego comes to terms with not necessarily being real and realizing that you're not really ever going to die, because that would imply that you were born, because you can't be born or die, because there is no beginning to that story. There's no beginning to it. Death and life are an arbitrary line that have been drawn so that you can exist to begin with. Then you can relax. And you also don't feel like you're this like special thing. You know that you're organic as far as this lower self is concerned. And then you're like, okay, that's going to be me. I'm like, it's okay. It's okay. We're going to be fine. Even if we don't. Life's a ride. Life's a ride, everybody. And again, I won't be frightened when I'm awoken for this dream, speaking to this reality being that dream, being this infinite hallucination that we have given for ourselves to live in, through, for hot shit. It goes on and on and on and on. Perfect. Yeah, this went well. This felt good. This went quick too. 21 minutes. Not bad. Not bad. Thanks, guys. I appreciate you sticking around. If yeah, let me know what you think. Yeah, I'm gonna keep rolling with this format. I think I'm the happiest with this. Yeah, do your thing. Love you guys. And love yourselves. Only if you want to, you know, do whatever you want. Do whatever you want. Reality is directing us all back to something. So thank you all. Yeah, if you got any ideas for things you want me to kind of go balls deep on, I will do it. I'll do it, regardless of what it is. So thank you and good night.